Welcome to the Great Lakes Fishing Podcast presented by Fishhawk Electronics. If you're looking for news, tips, and stories about fishing the Great Lakes, you've come to the right place. And now your host, Chris Larson.
Welcome to the Great Lakes Fishing Podcast. Today, we are joined by Carl Fuzzy Bear Stopczynski, and we're talking spring fishing on Southern Lake, Michigan. Carl, before we get going here, first, I got to ask you the question everybody wants to know, and that is, how did you get the nickname Fuzzy?
If you saw my back hair, you would know. No. Actually, it was a combination of a couple of different boats I had named, and my wife and kids kind of put the two together. I had the nickname Fuzzy for a long time, and then some guys call me Bear because I'm, little in stature. But so somehow or another, it got put on probably 6 boats ago. It started to be the Fuzzy Bear. So that's how it was just one of those deals. I was a police officer for 32 years. So between the Bear and the Fuzzy, it kind of stuck. So
all right,
that's what we went with.
That sounds good. Well, Southern Lake, Michigan is kind of your spot. It's the hot spot for coho in the spring. Can you tell us a little bit about fishing your waters and what makes it so good for coho this time of year?
Well, historically, our water warms faster and we get the bait faster. Over the years, it's changed some, but typically, there was that circle of life in the middle of Lake Michigan and the southern end of that. There was, the scientists and biologists believe there was the rotating current, southern end of Lake Michigan. The bottom of it was in that 100, 150, 200, and everybody believed that the next year's fish, or the young jacks and young kings, all wintered, south in the south part of the lake. And there are times when I had a boat that I could trailer or winterize myself, like my 30-foot Cherokee, we stayed in New Buffalo and fished until December. Sometimes guys kept it until Christmas, and you could go out and catch 100 if you wanted to go out 15 miles. And so, in the spring, those fish just march to the warm water, go to all the harbor mouths, and end up shallow. Contrary to belief, a lot of those fish don't even eat. We'll catch coho for 4 or 5 weeks that don't have anything in their belly. And that's primarily because the bait hasn't gotten there yet. That's changed a lot with our lake being so clean, and them eating the red shrimp out deep down. But historically, we have warm water, the fish like it. They get active, and then we start rolling. Sometimes in March, but first week of April's always very good all the way through April.
Yeah, you said that it's changed a little bit. What has changed, and why do you think that has happened?
Well, it's, all back to the zebra and quagga mussels and the clean water. We start tournament fishing the 3rd week of April, and you never could win it with coho. And our first tournament was always strictly silverfish, so you couldn't weigh lake trout. So years ago, we'd go 2 or 3 boats if you could, the ones you could trust to share information with. We'd go out in deep water, 150 and out, roll the 250 sometimes, and look for steelhead in cold water. Everything was surface oriented, but you run some baits down deep every once in a while to see it was there. And, we start catching coho on downriggers in the bottom from 150 to 200 feet deep. You'd stack a set of spoons down deep, and, you'd come up with 2 coho. And that changed because that's what they're out there eating. You'd catch a half a dozen of them. You'd go through and you catch 2 or 3 or 4 on a flat line on a body bait or a spoon, and next minute you have 4 of them on downriggers, 200 down. And so with the clean water, obviously food is a big deal. And in the last half a dozen years, so we've been able to look at that with electronics, especially, obviously it's no secret I love Garmin, and you could see that mysis shrimp, or those red shrimp, there's not the proper name, but you could see cloudiness like the old days when there were the bottom of the food chain was out in clouds of bait. Essentially, they're not bait fish, but the microorganisms. And now we find those coho offshore where those clouds are, and if you can't find that cloud, they only may move in a mile or two, but that's a lot when you're in deep water and not a lot of boats finding them. So it's just one of those deals where it's changing all the time, and you have to keep up with it. You have to be willing to go. And obviously, when we get outside of 50 feet of water, I'm fishing the fish hawk all the time because current makes a big deal, especially when you're fishing so deep. So, we don't like to go out there in the spring. We don't have to, but seems like there's different bands of fish. There's shore fish that come in, stay for a month, and then leave. And I believe the deep water fish just cross from east to west, and they go to the shores off that deep water, and I don't think those fish ever come to shore. But that's just my personal guess. But I talk to guys all over the lake all the time, and when we're fishing, we'll catch fish offshore because the inside got tore up and we had to go. And 2-3 days later, the North Chicago guys, Waukegan guys, Kenosha, those guys are starting to catch coho. That means ours moved, and they're not coming back once they go.
Where do you start looking for them when you're going to go out, Carl?
Oh, it's nothing when you go to deep water. There's nothing special. You just seat of your pants kind of thing, historical, where you thought you caught them before. That deep water is just, you have to go for miles sometimes without a bite, and it's hard to do with a charter. That's why a lot of guys don't want to go, because you may not find them. Once you find them, it's pretty easy. But this time of year, we can normally catch them inside of 50 feet. So a lot of, like in Michigan City, New Buffalo, you can set lines at the harbor and turn right or left and stay inside of 30 feet. A lot of times inshore, we'll put the boat on the inside sandbar, like guys fish brown trout up the lake. We'll fish them, 8, 10, 15 feet of water. That 8 to 30 feet, you have to zigzag. Sometimes they're in 20, 25. Sometimes they're up in shallow. It seems like after we get a big blow, the fish either belly down or go out. And when they do come back in and bite, the water cleans first in that inside sandbar. So you could be catching them in 5 to 8 feet of water. And then as it cleans up, they just, kind of congregate back where they started. But, they don't like all that sand in their gills. And you can catch them for a day after a blow, but then it seems like they just either belly down or disappear out to deeper water and scatter. Then they set back up.
Those fish are usually pretty high in the water column.
Yeah, surprisingly, we typically set up a 10 or 12 planer board flatline program. And we'll put, thin fish, the old rattling thin fin, some jointed rapala, nothing new. It's just new colors, but typically we'll set up a flatline program. You really don't have to do much else. We'll put a couple of high shallow divers with, either a Dodger or fly or maybe a thunder stick. That time of year, I'll run fly divers also, but when you're in that skinny water, you're only putting a diver off the boat 10, 15 feet. You can see it. You can see the coho flash and hit it. We call those our meat rods. But, in that shallow water, we'll go to downriggers too. That's last scenario, but sometimes there'll be browns, and, the kings are going to show up at any time too. Once that water gets to 45 and above, then the bait starts to show, and then the kings will show. You'll know when the kings are coming when the small boats or somebody gets a flat line drilled by a big king. Well, that's the start of it. And they'll show up. They just sometimes overnight, because they sure leave overnight. But that's why our fishery's so good down there in the spring. You just, everything's coming to the shallow water, to the food, the warm water. But on the same token, in Indiana water, Southern Lake Michigan, you pay the price come, July and August. Most of those kings aren't there anymore. Indiana's not planting that many. Plus, they don't stay. Sometimes we'll warm up with now with a north wind, it'll blow in some surface water that's a little warmer. But when you get a big north in the summertime, you can be stacked for 10 or 12 miles is 70-degree water in summertime. So then you're for sure offshore and fishing for anything that's got fins and a tail.
How fast are you normally running in the springtime?
I tend to troll faster. A lot of guys will stick at 1.8 to 2. I'm like 2.4 and above. Sometimes we'll go down to 2.2 too if we have to. But in the spring, the coho pot up in little batches. So you could go, a lot of times we'll start in Michigan City and end up in Burns Harbor, and you'll have your 30 in that 10-mile trawl. Sometimes it'll take 5 miles to get you 30. Sometimes it'll take 2, but current's important. Direction of troll is really important in the spring. Sometimes, not always, but a lot of times if you turn around and say you had 4 or 5 coho, 4 or 5 rods that go off at the same time, because when you run through a pod, you get a bunch of hits. Some of them stick, some of them don't. You think, man, I ought to go back there. Well, if you go back there, you have to turn out because you're in shallow. You have a big spread going. So by the time you get turned around, a lot of times then fish won't bite going the other way. In the spring, it's just really weird. So a lot of times if we get good bites going at, say, 2.4 on an east troll, which really is not true east, but on the southern end of the lake, we head toward between Michigan City to Burns Harbor. A lot of times we just won't turn around because we know every time we go through a little pod, we'll hit 4 to 6 bites. And you know, it's different all the time. Sometimes you go to the east towards New Buffalo, it's good. But you don't know that until you troll and you know, listen on the radio, because we work together down south a lot. But it's all different. Every day is a challenge. That's why, you know, Lake Michigan is so appealing to a lot of guys. It's a challenge every day you go out. It's different. There's very few days it's the same.
What are some of your favorite baits when you're trolling in the spring?
Oh, obviously, you know, rattling thin fins. I've got old school red squiggle. We called old gold is orange and gold. And all the new Brads thin fish have all the good colors too. There's some favorites there, the rainbow trout, and there's a blue laser, and it's typically something with rattle because we don't have clean water now, and we won't have that for quite some time. So, you know, I like to fish 50 feet off the board on one side and 75 off the other side, and they'll tell you which side if they like it close to the board. And I always use the Big John rattle board in the spring. The coho aren't boat shy like kings are. You know, a lot of times we'll run sliders, pin sliders, we'll only have a downrigger down 20 feet, and you put little spoons. Obviously, I'm partial to the Fuzzy Bear brand, and plus we use the Dreamweaver SS's a lot in the spring until the kings show up. Spring kings love magnums. At that time of year, the bait that comes to shore are the older bait. So we're big bait, big spoon. We run a lot of those on the bottom. I'll always run the center downrigger with the probe on it, and we'll stack a set of Fuzzy Bear magnums. Called Old Yeller is one of my favorites in there. It's something that's bright, something that glows because we have dirty water. And it's when I say dirty, it's some days it's just chalked up from the wind. And now with all this erosion going on, it's going to be a mess. Right now we're limited. We can't charter fish right now. Indiana followed Michigan. Michigan's been that way for almost 2-3 weeks now, and they're not allowing any. We're not essential businesses, so nobody's chartering right now. Indiana got away with it for a little bit, and then that changed. So I'm not sure what Illinois and Wisconsin are doing. Right now, nobody's charter fishing. You know, we were set to start last week, and so right now we're not. But that's a whole different story. We all have to find our way through this whole mess. But we're gonna roll as soon as we can get, the private guys still fish, and those guys are catching plenty of coho. Seems like there's small batches in now. All winter with the winter that was so mild, our Trail Creek had coho in it all winter, and guys are catching 5 casts, 5 fish. Don't know how much that hurt us, but that went on for a couple of months, and it's typical. They come and go underneath the ice, even in a bad winter situation. So, but we'll see how it goes. But the favorites, it's everybody's got their own. Our Kevorkian Seeker, that purple is it's called Michigan City Purple, really, but in the Fuzzy Bear line, it's a seeker. It's got green glow on it. Dark baits, dirty water, bright baits. Everybody's got some favorites, but you'll know when the kings show up. Then we start turning our program over from fishing strictly coho. Now it's tournament time. Last week of April, first week of of May. I'm sorry, and so we need to start fishing kings primarily because we're pre-fishing with charter clients essentially for our tournaments. And so the south end is exciting. You never know what's going to happen, when they're going to come. Years ago we had fish all the way from Burns Harbor to St. Joe, and the kings come to shore. They typically hit the 20, 30 miles of shore head kings. Now with the numbers down the last couple of years, you can see there's probably only about 15 miles of at best. And if the water's really dirty in Michigan City, Burns Harbor, tore up from a big blow, and the kings want to come in on the backside, sometimes they'll bypass Burns Harbor and Michigan City and hit New Buffalo, Cook, and then St. Joe. But we always get some kings in Michigan City. It's just a matter of how many and when they're going to hit. Last year, May 3rd, we caught 30 adult Chinooks. You could throw a rock to the lighthouse in front of Michigan City. And the first day of the tournament on Saturday, they were gone. There were still some stragglers, but they moved up the lake past New Buffalo and to Cook. So all them fish moved 10, 15 miles overnight. So you just never know.
We've been talking coho. You've just laid down a lot of knowledge there on kings. What are some of the other species that you're targeting in your area in the spring?
Well, that's primarily it. You'd catch an occasional steelhead that comes, that's a late drop, comes out of the river. We don't have any numbers of browns to actually fish. Sometimes we'll catch a brown here and there, but there's no big numbers. Indiana's tried to put, probably 20, 25,000 in all the time for the last, I would guess, 5 to 10 years. Brian Breitert was in charge then. He's retired now, and he was trading some Skamania for browns, I believe, to Illinois. But they just don't seem to be fishable in any numbers. We don't know where they go. I mean, we have enough boats down there that are fishing that if there was a number of browns around them, we'd catch them. But we just don't have a lot of structure. On the Wisconsin side and North Chicago, they've got all that rock reef that browns love that. And they even love it. Sea Forel and browns love that in the summertime, especially up Racine Way. And we just don't have a lot of browns. And lake trout, we'll catch them. That's primarily, Michigan City's. I don't know what the numbers were last year, but historically, Michigan City's charter boat numbers are more per hour of angler hour caught out of Michigan City than any harbor in Lake Michigan. That's primarily because of the lake trout. In the summertime, all our silvers go away, and you're either trying to find steelhead or offshore fish. But the bread and butter is the lake trout, unfortunately. I say unfortunately is not because I can't catch them and don't want to catch them, but they take a long time to grow. And, a lot of our clients are there to catch kings. And that's one of the reasons I moved the boat to Pentwater, and, we fish Pentwater, Ludington, Manistee. And now actually I'm living in Pentwater, and that's primarily where we're at. Except in the spring, we'll be down there for a month and a half for sure. Almost 2. So that's why I always move the boat. Number 1, tournament time, and number 2, the kings go up the lake. And, this is a place to be up here in the summertime. And unfortunately, the south end of the lake, has suffered a lot because we don't have a lot of Chinook. And in the summertime, it's primarily a lake trout fishery. But in the spring, we're catching we're catching lake trout on flat lines also. But if you want to go catch trout, you just go out the state line, set up, 50, 60, 70 foot, 70 to 100. You can catch generally as many as you want. If you do it right, know what you're doing. And sometimes we have to do that if our inside's tore up and the fish are not biting or not there, because, sometimes we'll get 10 or 15 miles of tore up lake. If it blows, it's 300 plus miles of lake that rolls up in Michigan City. And if it's all tore up and they don't want to eat, you got to go find them in clean water. So we'll rip and run 10, 15 miles offshore. And, if you want to put, fish in a box for your clients, then, you'll fish trout and fish the whole spread out there, downriggers, divers, 4 divers, 3 riggers, and, at least 10 flats. And you're staying in the water, we're covering a couple 300 feet of water as we go. So it's not the ideal situation, but sometimes we have to. Whatever Mother Nature gives us, we have to go with. So.
You brought up the word client several times in our conversation, Fuzzy. What's a day on the water with you like for charter clients?
Oh, typically you like to have they become friends over the years. I mean, you have good ones and you have not so good ones, just like anything else. But we have fun. You got to have fun. I mean, they're paying. It's really an entertainment business as much as it is a fishing business. I try to tell the guys, that the young guys that get into it, they're all geeked up about filling the box, and that's an important part of it. But if you catch 2 or you catch 22, they still have to have fun. So I always pick on one person on the boat for sure. And you find out which one, if you see a grouchy one, you can pick on him. At corporate trips, I like to pick on the boss. He's paying for his guys to go fishing, and they all love that. So, I mean, you got to have fun with them, and that's what it's all about.
People want to go out on a boat with you. How do they find you? What's the best way to contact you?
Phone, text is best. Either way. I'd rather talk to people than text them. And, that's just 574-607-2542.
It was great talking to you today. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't ask you about?
We don't leave the dock without a fish hawk. It just, I've been using one for 25 plus years, even, before Trevor came out with the new X4. And, I still have old school heads. It's one of those things where we were one of the first ones in the Southern Lake, Michigan to use it. And that's primarily because we're getting our butts kicked up north when we were fishing tournaments, and it was being used up here. And current's very important, especially in the summertime. And it's for the guys that don't fish all the time. I can go out and set a rigger or a diver, and I can read the water and know what's going on, because I've been doing it for a long time. But the guys that, are weekend fishing, it's more important to them than anything. You can find your thermocline in the summer, and, direction of troll is very important in the summer, especially with kings, because there's not big miles of them. There's little pods of them, and you have to be going the right way to catch them most of the time. Oftentimes, speed and direction is far more important than anything you put in the water. And it doesn't matter if it's a spin doctor and fly or fuzzy bear spoon. You got to get the speed and direction right. And sometimes color doesn't matter. And it's more important to get that stuff right. And with a fish hawk, you can do it. I mean, you fool yourself on wanting to fish it. A thermocline, you can fish in the wrong places with the temperature. That just you learn that over time. Just don't always fish cold, fish above and below, because the fish feed in the warm water, especially in the morning, late in the evening. But we don't leave it. There's only about 2 weeks, maybe 3 at the most, that I don't use a fish hawk, because that's when we're fishing the beach in this early April, late March, early April. As soon as kings show up, we got a probe in, and I'm fishing 2.4, 2.6, and I'm fishing for kings, but then we're catching coho at the same time. But then we're using a fish hawk in 30 to 70 foot of water. It's one thing to keep in mind with the probe. If you're talking to other people, know where they have their probe. Some guys run it on the out down, some guys run it in the chute. I like to run mine deep. And for instance, Brent from Sportsman Charters up in Pentwater, he puts his on an out down. So when we're trying to match speeds, one boat to the next, if mine's in the chute, his is on an out down. His is typically higher in the warm water, and mine, I like to find the cold deep water, and that's where I set my probe. But when you compare the two boats, your cold water, your probe is not reading as fast as you're up in the warm water. That's what gets you a thermocline, and that's what gets you, opposite currents. So just have everybody keep that in mind. But it's a tool that needs to be used. I know it's expensive, but if you're going to buy a box of lures, for this coming year, I'd save some money and buy a fish hawk instead, and then buy your lures, because you'll catch more fish without it, there's no doubt.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much, Fuzzy. That was some great information. And throughout the whole show, you shared some really good stuff I think people will be able to use to catch more fish when they eventually are able to get out in the water and do some fishing. And hope that you guys in the charter business can get through this time and get out there and get some of this money back that you're losing with all this going on. And Hope you guys have a great year this year.
All right. Thanks. Appreciate the talk.
Thanks for listening to the Great Lakes Fishing Podcast presented by Fishhawk Electronics. For more information on fishing the Great Lakes, visit our blog at fishhawkelectronics.com.